Oh, I've still got beeps going on. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Mann's Model Moments Midweek Model Meet. I think I had a bit of an echo going on there, but it seems to have gone now. Anyway, good evening, everybody. Just myself at the moment. I know John Alec will be joining us at some point in the near future. And we have a couple of topics for discussion this evening. Why aren't my details coming up there? That's always slightly annoying. I gotta remember how to do those. So one is on the subject of paint ranges. I have these as a bit of a visual aid. So I'll talk about those a little bit. Another one that was mentioned in the community chat were the subject of pilots in kits. I think we've covered that pretty much, pretty exhaustively on Airfix and Chill. We did actually one about 3 weeks ago or so, I think it was. So if you haven't seen that, go and check out Airfix and Chill. It's on my live section of the site or on Moss's, a couple of other people's. So go and check that out if you want to talk about or see us talk about the subject of pilots. Good evening, John Alec. Feel free to jump in at any point. And then the other subject was SciFi, and why doesn't Airfix do SciFi, which is or space actually? Really, I think the only current active space model they have is the Eagle Has Landed, I think it's called, something like that, which is just a little lunar module with a bunch of their sort of vinyl plastic astronauts, which is, a bit lame, I would say. And yeah, I mean, licenses are one thing, right? But I mean, Revell do all the Star Wars stuff, they do the Mandalorian stuff, it's all heavily licensed. AMT used to do I think still do a lot of that. MPC do things like the Eagle transporter and the Hawk from Jerry Anderson, Space 1999. So I don't think the licensing issue really covers the problems, especially because there are some specialized companies that kind of come up with it. I think it is the perception of the market, but I think if you get SciFi right, I mean, if you look at the likes of Bandai, right, Games Workshop, I mean, the majority of what they do is SciFi. It's finding a niche and catering for it. I saw an interesting video actually today from a channel called Goobertown Hobbies, a guy called Brent over in the US. And he's mainly a mini painter, right? He's a fellow scientist. And he was saying about Warhammer and about actually it's not really for casual players. It's most people that he plays with, and he may play like a couple of times a year when he's into it, which isn't enough to really get to know the rules. But most of the thing is painting his army. Yeah. So like collecting the stuff together, like building it, painting it, meeting his friends, seeing what they've built and painted, and having a laugh with them. And the game is actually a minor part. So I think actually, in that respect, those kind of 40k gamers are modelers. They're modelers first. The game is just kind of almost a conduit doing that. And I know that's not even the majority, maybe, of the Warhammer 40k community. But there is a niche of people that enjoy that particular stuff. Think of I think it was the Dust sort of like future World War II kind of stuff, like armored suits but kind of like in World War II theme, like 1946 alternate reality kind of thing. They were quite popular at the time. And as Gary said here, classic, especially airfix. If you think about classic British sci-fi, like all of the Jerry Anderson stuff, like Blake Seven, with the Liberator and things. I think that probably is like involving. Well, obviously the Jerry Anderson stuff is that estate. Blake Seven, I think, is probably just a BBC, which may be difficult to deal with. I don't know. But these do have cult followings, so they are particular niches. So I think there are, maybe they're not general models, but if something's cool, somebody will model it. It doesn't have to be necessarily in the niche if it just catches their eye. So yeah, it's an interesting one that I think airfix, because let's face it, there was quite a lot of British sci-fi around in the 60s and 70s. And I think also you could extend that out to some of the stuff from the US as well. I remember watching stuff as a kid, which were obviously reruns from, oh God. Well, of course, you got Star Trek, obviously. Mark just mentioned the Enterprise there. And if you think about the design of both the Liberator from Blake Seven and the Enterprise from Star Trek, they weren't traditional looking spacecraft at the time, because if you think the 60s, there were rockets, right? We had the Saturn, we had the Soyuz, and then in the 80s, when you had Blake Seven, it was really the space shuttle was the pinnacle of space. And both of those, in terms of futuristic looking things, were very different. Very kind of out there, in terms of their design. So it's an interesting question why more don't get into that kind of area. I think Revell is probably ahead of most of the pack as a large manufacturer in getting those sort of franchises. I think there are small companies that go and pursue those as well. I know for the Jerry Anderson stuff, like Captain Scarlet and things, that there was some at Telford this year. And just trying to think of other stuff. I mean, Star Trek, obviously, again, Revell have Star Trek models as well as the Star Wars models. So it's eminently possible to do all of this. So as to why they don't pursue it more, I don't know. It's a good question. It's a bit of an unknown to me, because evidently there is a market for it. Maybe it isn't in the core market that airfix traditionally go for, but then to me, as a business person, right, that's your expansion market, right? If you've got a core market, you want to capitalize on that. But getting new customers is either an expansion of your existing customer base. So if people are interested in British subjects or World War II subjects stuff, you want to expand those and be more completionist to capture that. Or you capture new markets. And you see Revell doing this all the time. If you think about the Revell catalog from this year, which has the World of Warcraft stuff, it has Naruto, it obviously has the Star Wars stuff as well, then that is, those are new markets. Those are people that aren't traditional model builders. So, yeah. So 2009, airfix had stuff from the BBC, Doctor Who. They didn't they do a Dalek or something? I seem to recall there was some stuff there. And Shaun the Sheep. You see, this was all just before they went bust, wasn't it? This was just was it 2012? I can't remember when. I can never remember when Hornby bought it. I think it was 2012. Shaun the Sheep range released in 2008. I mean, I get why things like Shaun the Sheep aren't done now, because it was very much of that time. So you pick up on a current trend and do that. But the, things that have a cult following, like Space 1999, like Star Trek, like Star Wars, like Blake 7, those aren't transient in the way that those, things like Shaun the Sheep, which is kind of a bigger but more transient thing. So I think there was a balance between the two. I mean, we've seen some like Revell bring out the Moonraker space shuttle, which is basically the same normal space shuttle, which is an ancient tooling with just new decals. It's just like that's kind of not what I'm looking for. Hmm. Space 1999, Eagle in the 1970s. So MPC have re-engineered their stuff, and it's actually pretty good. The airfix stuff, I think, was quite inaccurate at the time. And I think this is probably one of the true things, is 3D printing actually kind of does go to that, right? These are perhaps lower volume things that people can print or get printed. And maybe that's why we don't see as many space and sci-fi. Or is it that there just aren't that many iconic space and sci-fi things out there now? I don't know, because we've just seen great success of Godzilla Minus One. That was a surprise success considering its budget. I missed it at the cinemas. I'm still waiting to see it. You can't get it on streaming anywhere in the world at the moment. I'm kind of gutted that I didn't see it at the time, because I really want to. But there's also June. So June 2, currently at the cinemas. Again, they've had great accolades. A lot of people have seen them, very successful. They do have some cool stuff in there, and there are some models of them out there. But do we need more of that? Do we need to see more iconic sort of movie franchises and things? I don't think. I mean, if you think of Star Wars, I know it's a painful subject to many people. I bemoan the death of Star Wars, the Disney death of Star Wars. The episode 7 was very much, episode 4 reworked for a new generation, if you like, and then the next two were just, in my honest opinion, garbage. Especially the last one, which was just unreal. I mean, once they started going into bombers with gravity in space, it's like and prank phone calls. It's like, this is Star Wars, and didn't really see an awful lot of models and stuff following up from that. Now, there's been some. There was more in The Mandalorian, and I think Mandalorian got a much better reception, much better pull through. But do we need more of that? Is that one of the reasons we're not seeing it from model companies? Because we're not getting that pull through. What about video games? Do we need to see more models from video games? Is that kind of the film kind of franchise thing for the early quarter of the 21st century? I'm not sure. So I'm going to park that at the moment because I think there's only so much I can talk about by myself about that subject. I'll talk a little bit about paint. So those of you who have subscribed to the channel for a while or seen my videos for a while may have seen that I did a video, quite an early video, on cataloging my paints. So if you've not seen it, it's still live on the channel. You can go and see it. But basically what I do is when I get a paint, so I have these little custom bases made from a company in the UK called Bow and Blade. These are 12 by 70 millimeters, and I spray them with white primer, and then I mask them and spray portion with grey, and I mask it again and spray portion black. So what that leaves me is all of these little tiles, which are exactly the same. I don't know how well you can see that there. I could actually move it down to my other camera, but I need to change the lighting, so bear with me for the moment. So that leaves me all of these paint chips. Let's see if I can get one with a darker color on, just see if that doesn't wash out as much. Yeah, that's probably better. You can see it on there. There you go, especially against my head. It's not quite washed out. So it leaves me, as you can see, with a white area, a grey area, and a black area that I can then paint over. And I paint over with colour, just using brush paint, paint it over with just a single coat, let it dry, and then I paint over the second half with a second coat. And what that does is it gives me an indication of what the colour actually looks like when it's dry, right? Which is different from how, you know, a description might be. And shows me the coverage, like, so how dense the pigment is, what kind of coverage that is giving me. Does it, you know, if I look at, for instance, and this is one of the reasons I like ICM colors, for instance. Here's ICM blue-gray. You can't see that very well at all. Okay, I am going to switch cameras. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, way success. So let's put on a little light. Here we go. So I don't have to fiddle about too much. So here is that. Right, out of focus at the moment. Is that out of focus? Focus, thank you. So this is Army Painter Pure Red. And as you can see, the coverage is pretty terrible, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's on white, grey, or black. One coat doesn't do it. Two coats don't really do it. So that tells me this is not what I want for base coat, right? This is a more of a filter almost than anything else. Here we have, this is ICM's blue-grey. And hopefully you can see even one coat there gives pretty good coverage of it, and it's a light color. Two coats, you really can't tell what surface it's over, right? So that's giving really good coverage. So this would be good as a foundation color. But for instance, if I was putting a top color over pre-shading, that pigment color might actually be too dense. Right? Here's Chimera colors. This is Nature Green. So you can see one coat is pretty thin. Two coats cover actually pretty well. So again, this tells me various things about the properties of the colors. What I also do then is scan all of these paint chits, and they're all magnetic as well. They've got a little magnetic strip on the back, so I can attach them to these steel sheets for spraying and stuff. This is just an old steel sheets that I have for various bases. Here's Cobalt Blue Green from Chimera Colors. So these are the AK interactive colors. So AK has really good pigment density. So it also shows you, even though you've got good pigment density, why you should do two coats. Because even with one coat and good pigment density, you're not getting even coverage. Two coats, much more even coverage. So, you know, even the yellow is pretty good. So yeah, I can scan all of these, and then I basically convert all of the scanned colors into LAB format, which is a color space rendering. Let me switch back to my main camera. There we go. And also And I'll bring in John. Good evening, John.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm here. I'm surviving.
Got
As John knows, a bit of a rough week so far with personal stuff. But one of the reasons I wasn't on Airfix and Chill on Monday, I had a whole bunch of stuff sorting. But yes, here in the midweek. So just talking about colours, John, and I was just explaining kind of what I do in terms of my process of, when I get colours and then I'm scanning them all in, I put into an LAB format, and then you can work out colour distances. So if I find a colour of something online that I like the look of, for instance, the Aggressor scheme, I can find a paint in my collection that's pretty close to that pretty quickly by using that system. And then I kind of use that as a baseline and then adjust up and down depending on what I'm doing. So as you can see from these
very scientific
the sheets that I have,
excuse me,
I'm judging these by the colors. Ooh, there they go. I'm judging them by the colors rather than by the manufacturer. So, as I showed just then, I've got Army Painter, I've got AK, I've got Chimera, I've got ICM, I've got all kinds of stuff here. So I am very substrate in specific with regards to paint. What about you? Do you tend to just go by kind of manufacturer and have a set sort of go-to, or does it differ by subject? How do you approach paint?
Good question. So first thing that I do is I put everything in these 20 mil vials, and so I will label them like this is Tamiya acrylic buff, what here, and then on the top I'll label it Tamiya buff because I lay them down. It's a space saver. I'm sorry. But what this does is it tells me instantly what's the color. What does this look like? It's not on a primer. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold, so I sound a little terrible. But it also lets me know how much I have left, right? And I can shake these up. They're pretty good for shaking. And that way I get around, because all the manufacturers, they have these all, the bottles they come in, they're all different. The vials, the bottles, whatever. I can transfer them into this and it's all uniform, and they can just lie down with each other, here on my shelf. And then what I tend to do is I tend to put, like I have my Model Master, my Vallejo, and my AK third gen together. And so I sort of, in my mind, I classify those as acrylics that have a surfactant, because you shake those and they bubble, so they have a like a detergent in them. Like, so for the primers, you shake their primers and their primers bubble, right? So it's a surfactant. And then I'll put and then I have my Model Master and my Tamiya. And then I'll have my Humbrol, which I only have a few of because they're enamels. Then there's all my lacquers, right? So I'll have my AK Real. I have my Mr. Color, just probably my favorite thing. And then I might have, if I have something like Outlaw or Pro Scale, I'll have that sort of at the end because they tend to be a little hot. And I do that so I have all my browns, I have my blacks, my yellows, my greens, whites, reds, my metallics, all that kind of stuff. And so I put them by general things. So my blacks, my reds.
Yeah.
And then my next level of sort of binning them, right, putting them in boxes are surfactant acrylics, your alcohol acrylics or non-alcohol acrylics, and then your lacquers, your enamels and your lacquers. And so that's how I do it, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned reformatting. So I reformat into these. Basically, like a lot of the manufacturers, like Vallejo and OK and others, use these little plastic bottles, screw top bottles, basically screw top dropper bottles. So I reformat into these because I just find them, one, much more convenient. Like you say, they all shake the same. I can pop a couple of little shaking balls in there. They all go in the same paint rack, so I don't have to worry about different diameters of stuff. And like, I do exactly the same. Label them. You can see the color. And as I say, I have my. So what I normally have, these are all put onto these for scanning.
Right.
But these all go on a whiteboard. I've got a whiteboard, and they're magnetic, so I can shift them around. So when I get more paints, I can add them in, and done by the same sort of thing. Done through the color spectrum, so that for me, it helps me if I'm doing an olive drab, say I'm doing a tank or figure. Actually, it helps a lot with manual brush painting. So if I want to lighten a green, I'll use a lighter green, not white. If I want to go really light with it, I'll probably maybe use a yellowish green. And the same dark, you can pull it down in darkness. And so it's just easier for me. Same way if I'm doing post shading, or if I'm doing want to do filter effects and stuff, you can get things which are very closely aligned, or pull them in a green direction or a red direction or whatever. So,
nice.
So yeah, I've never kind of gone, and I've mentioned this on airfix and chill and other things. I've never gone by that. You buy a specific color, RLM 72, and that's it. That's your shade, because that's not how it works. Even for the real things. But for models, for me, that's kind of, I think, where I've evolved more in painting, is the kind of, applying filters, applying variation, applying all of those effects with color, and more into the color theory side of things. And as you said, the more I'm a scientific person, that's where your brain works, so I break it down scientifically, but I'm scientifically doing what artists do intuitively.
Right.
It's just the way my brain works, as opposed to somebody who just can naturally intuit, the feeling of the color and stuff. But who I envy greatly, I must say.
Oh yeah. There's this Asian fellow. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Sometimes it pops up in my shorts or whatever, and you can show him any color whatsoever. He looks at it and he will whip up. He has I think he has about 10 paints, and he will whip it up, paint it on a thing, and it matches absolutely perfectly. It's the most amazing thing. You can look it up on YouTube later, but fellow matches paint or whatever by eye, and so yeah, I really envy those. Yeah, like RLM 02, right? So RLM gray 02. I have Mr. Color, I have Outlaw Paints, I have Tamiya, and all three are different.
Yeah,
they are not the same. You can't. So going not by RLM 02, but okay, which one do I like of those three? Which one do I think looks visually interesting for my model? And that's the one I'm going to go with. Yeah.
Just comment here. So I agree. It is down to taste. I mean, I think we've said this many times. I think, John, you agree. Modeling is all about you and your model. It's not about what somebody else wants for it. So it is completely all down to personal taste. And I think Vallejo paints are pretty good. And I think in the mini painting community, for instance, if you watch Squidmar, he does a lot of 40K stuff. I think they looked at a whole range of paints in a very flawed, non-scientific way, I would say, but they still came to the conclusion that for them, Vallejo were the best brand, and I would say Vallejo paints are pretty good. I think the AK 3rd Gen are up there with them for the scale modeling fraternity. They may not work quite as much on the mini painting because they're not designed for that, but maybe. In terms of a lot of channels pushing ICM a lot at the moment, I don't think it's due to free ads or that they're giving free stuff. I think it is genuinely because they're pretty good paints. So, as I said, and this isn't, I think I just showed you these ICM paint kits. They have really quite good coverage and they have good general properties. These paint chits I only do by hand, but they do spray. They spray okay. And in a lot of cases, they handle better than Vallejo paints. There are some which I don't really like that much. So the reds, I think, the reds and yellows are slightly weaker. Their silver is awful. And yet it's weird because normally a range will have either good metallics or bad metallics, And most ranges, I think, have bad metallics. Pro Acryl do some good metallics. ICM's brass is really good, though. But their silver is just awful. I mean, it's just, I don't know how they've made it as bad as they have. It doesn't cover, it's thin. Over a few coats, yeah, if you want to do 3 coats to get your silver, but it's like, who's got time for that? Whereas their gunmetal is actually pretty good as well. So the metallics are a bit hit and miss depending on which it is. But generally, I think the other colors that they have are genuinely quite good, especially brush painting. You don't have to thin them much. You can use them pretty much directly. So I think that's one of the reasons they're getting traction. And much like their models is not because they're just, giving free shit out. It's because actually what they're doing is actually genuinely pretty good. Because I think, giving free stuff out works for a certain amount of time, but only for a certain amount of time, because once it's gone into general circulation, people realize, hey, actually, this isn't any good, and then you get a bad reputation and then that whole thing. So I don't see that with ICM. But, as you say, it's down to your own taste. I've not seen a huge amount of people use ICM paints. So I can't really tell on that. So have you ever used ICM paints, John?
I have not. I was just looking while you were talking and listening to you, and I wanted to see where it was available here in the United States. And 1001 Hobbies has it, but coming soon, right?
Right. Okay.
So it's all, from what I can see, it's all eBay. Yeah, and so if I click on that, I don't know if those folks are in the United States or not, but I'm not seeing. So Super Hobby, again, 1001hobbies.com. Okay, so 1001hobbies.com has it, but that's international, as I've discovered anyways. So
Yeah.
so even though it has a sort of a US-ish storefront, and it sort of shows that it's maybe shipping out of Georgia, it is not shipping.
Yeah, I think it's based in Europe, isn't it? And it
Yes.
just ships everywhere.
So it takes like 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get it. So yeah. So we don't have them here just yet.
No.
But I'll try them.
Yeah, it's I mean, they are. Somebody asked here. Sorry,
They're French.
cost compared to the rest. So they're slightly smaller than Vallejo bottles. I think they're 12 mil. I can't find it on here. Oh, I can, but it's in tiny font size. Let me just switch over to the other camera because then I don't have to see it. I can just show you.
It's bigger than Mr. Color, because Mr. Color is 10 mil. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. 12 mils. Sorry, I'm doing it so you can actually see it. So yeah.
Cool.
So smaller than a Vallejo, but bigger than a Mr. Color or Tamiya. And yeah, so one of the things I don't like about the I mean, it's not a problem for me because I generally reformat. Oh, switch that camera off. So they just open. They don't have like a dropper or anything in there. So, although I've not knocked one over yet, which is surprising because I generally do knock things over. They're quite cost effective. So I think looking at them, I did like trying to compare them sort of per mil to see how much they are. And I think they're one of the cheapest ranges. So they're pretty competitive. I've only think I've seen them in their sets. They do sets like I thought I had some here, but maybe not. And they'll do like them for British vehicles and stuff.
Yes.
The only thing I would say is the choices of their colors for vehicles or for a subject aren't necessarily what I would choose for that subject. And I think I mentioned this before. For Dark Earth, they recommend they use chocolate, which is way, way too dark. I've got it somewhere here, but it's whereas actually they have a deep brown, which is kind of too light. So yeah, in terms of color matching, doesn't matter for me because obviously I've scanned all of these and I can do my own stuff, but you can't kind of go off a name from an ICM paint and say, oh yeah, that'll match, Revell Dark Earth or something. Speaking of Revell, I did have an opportunity to try some Revell Aquacolor because I won't buy the stuff because it looks horrible, and it's interesting. You used Aquacolor, I think, haven't you, John?
I have. For Harry Stick, it's fine. I can use it. For airbrushing, it's a conundrum because it's really thick, thick, and so when you thin it down enough to where you can spray it, you then need. I painted a Porsche. What is it? The 108 Junior tractor.
Oh yeah,
I used the Revell Fire Red, and by the time I thinned it down so that I could actually spray it, it took at least 3, if not 4 coats just to cover the tractor so that it looked, non-opaque. You know what I mean, or non-transparent, I should say. Yeah, it was weird.
So one of the things I found is, I mean, you're right, incredibly thick. I actually found that the color separated in the pot. Well, one, those pots, who designed those needs to be like hung, found and tarred and feathered, chased around the bush. Because oh my god, something designed to be. I get from a kind of marketing point of view, or somebody thought, oh, this would be cool. We can twist it off and then we can stick it on. It forms this kind of triangle shape. That'll be really cool. You won't knock it over. Yeah, but nobody actually tried it before marketing it, because if they tried it, they'd be like, no, this is garbage design.
Yeah.
Why don't we just use those off-the-shelf plastic bottles that everybody uses? Oh no, why do that? We'll design our own. What? So it takes a lot to mix them.
Yeah.
And once they're mixed, I found the coverage, again, the pigment density was pretty good, but highly variable. And sometimes they really didn't want the binder in them, really didn't want to bind. Yeah, which is a problem, of course, if you then do have to thin them with airbrush thinner or whatever, because if that's when you get beading. If the binder doesn't actually, it gets diluted to a point where it can't hold the paint onto the plastic. The other thing I found, and I'm going to show you on the little camera here, is the colors are just so far off. The worst was the yellow. Let's just switch over to this camera here. So that is what yellow looks like. And okay, you'll get some distortion in the color and things from the camera, from being digital. This looks way more yellow than it actually is. In person, this is more like a flesh color. like a fleshy orange. And that's not fleshy orange. It's just straight Revell yellow. That's what they're asking you to paint like life jackets and propeller tips in, which is why I put the ICM one here just for comparison. So you see the ICM one actually has the usual problem with yellow. It doesn't cover very well, but that's a general yellow problem.
Yeah.
But at least it is yellow. The same is, okay, this is ICM's off-white. Okay, which is, very slightly off-white because this is on white paper background here, right? This is Revell's white, which is more of an off-white than off-white. It's like a cream white.
You're right. It's like an elfenbein or an ivory, the kind of
so it's like
the inside of a German tank with. Yeah.
Wow. Like German stencil, which is quite cool, but not what you want if it's just supposed to be white. So I found their color choices really odd. So yeah, I wasn't that impressed with Revell Aquacolor, I must say. I couldn't think of a time or a purpose for it over any other paint.
Correct. Right.
Because it's really thick, requires a load of mixing. Like the color separates out in the pot a lot. The colors are weird, and you're thinking, well, why wouldn't I use anything other than this? It's like
Tamiya,
yeah. I mean, it's just yeah. I mean, for me, I use obviously I tend to use Outlaw paints now as my sort of basing because they're quite hot, so I don't bother priming. I just use the Outlaw paints, and then I'll do stuff on that, because that's my kind of base layer. If I am going to spray acrylics, I'll always go to Tamiya, because I just find them, because they're alcohol, because they contain quite a lot of alcohol, the just spraying properties are so much better, and if I'm going to brush paint, if I have a choice, well, I'll use any of these acrylics other than Revell. And I don't really have a preference. Vallejo are good, AK I find good, Pro Acryl, Army Painter stuff, Chimera colors. There are advantages and disadvantages for a lot of these things. I mean, it really depends. As I can't remember who it was that said this, but your personal taste and what you're trying to do. Yeah. So this is one of the things I think that I know Moss was very impressed with. I think we were all quite impressed with how Outlaw paints worked with yellow, because the pigment density and the coverage of those lacquers is fantastic. Oh, one for you, John.
Yeah, I just responded. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
thank you, Jim. Yeah, I've just started using those Outlaw paints, and they are pretty hot. Sorry, I got a cold. But they spray beautifully. Oh my gosh. And the colors are like spot on. So that's what triggered my mind about the RLM Gray 02, of the three, Mr. Color and Tamiya and the Outlaw, I thought it was just spot on. That's the color that I expect when I see, RLM Gray. Yeah.
You see, I think in general, talking about paint, I think manufacturers, kit manufacturers, should not do paint. I think that's also true of tools and accessories in the main, right? Because I think about, companies. Well, let's just take Airfix, Hornby and Humbrol and Airfix as an example. It's just like their second generation acrylics are okay. The first ones were pretty naff. It's like all the effort they're expending into that when there are so many other options available. I just think, what else could they do if they weren't doing that? Right? It's not their area of expertise. They farm it out anyway. It's not something they're doing in-house. So it's like, why are you trying to flog this horse? It's just like, this is a race in which you are not a front runner. You're somewhere in the middle of the back. Same with Revell. The only one really I see that's doing a good job is Tamiya. But like many other Japanese companies, if they do something, they tend to bring it all in-house and do it really well. And they've been doing it for a long time. So I imagine Tamiya paints are, I imagine, a subdivision within Tamiya that have their own, experts and structure and production and manufacturing and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, because I don't know that, but I can imagine, having worked for Japanese companies and knowing how they work, I can imagine, and the way that they do it, how good the stuff is, I can imagine that's probably how it's set up, right?
They compartmentalize, right?
Yeah.
So they have distinct units, each with their own goals. Okay, you are the paint folks, you are the model folks, you know what I mean? So
Although I think it does play then into the tools and stuff, because I'm not sure, like,
and they do tools too.
Obviously the paint business is huge. To me, it's paint business. Their tools and stuff, it's like, yeah, we do it because we do models and things, but is that big enough to be run as a separate unit, or is that just folded into part of the others, the RC or something? I don't know. I mean, Tamiya tools are okay. Don't get me wrong. I think they're expensive for what you get. And for the same money, you can get better tools from a proper tool maker.
Correct.
But I get the one-stop shop thing. But I think in general, if you look at like Italeri, Revell, Humbrol, the tools that they put out I mean, nobody should buy any of those, right? They are generally cheap, nasty, not suitable, overpriced stuff. Moss and I talked about this on Beyond the Box. I did a video on it. It's just companies like Display, Meng actually are pretty good at this as well. And the Chinese are kind of another thing, because, again, I think they're big enough that they can devote the time and attention to it. And actually, when I looked at tools, Meng were actually, it still wasn't great, but what you were getting wasn't bad. But I think if you're more dedicated to it, AK, for instance, their tool set isn't bad. They have single-bladed nippers in their tool set, which for the price is pretty good. Whereas if you look at Iteleri's, Revell's, and Humbrol's, the nippers are garbage.
I wouldn't even think about getting.
No, they're dreadful.
Yeah.
So paints, it's kind of, it's interesting because it's a bit like an auto shop. You go to your garage to get your car fixed, and they also do like their own oil and transmission fluid, and it's just like, is this going to be better than like the stuff?
Here's the snake oil we make. Let's put it in your car.
It's just like, you could buy oil because it's easy, but it's just like, nah, I think I'll go with the oil that the manufacturer recommends. So it's a bit of a strange one to me, paints that are made by manufacturers. I mean, I think it's remarkable to me, actually, that ICM's paints are actually pretty good, considering that they are a fairly young company and doing so well in their other stuff. But I think generally it's a very different skill set. It's a completely different set of manufacturing requirements to make paints, to grind pigments down to a particular distribution of, we're talking about micron levels of grinding
size,
the particles, which is maybe why their metallics are a little bit over the place, because that involves there's typically two ways of doing it. You either include mica or I think it's actually metal flakes. Which again is completely different from milling normal paints. So complete off the track story. This I once had a friend who was in that business. They were into milling, right? So they worked with the pharmaceutical industry. So they would mill any product into, particular particle size or distribution size for then incorporation into, a packaging process to make into tablets or whatever. And he was approached by a company making artificial sweeteners. And in this case, it was sucralose. And they said, we want it in this particular stuff. And he was like, yeah, well, no problem. Could you send me sample? And they're like, yeah, how much do you want? He said, well, normally we go with like 100 kilos as a starter kind of thing. Have you ever seen sucralose? It's like sucralose weighs. It's like one of the least dense substances on Earth. It's like snowflakes.
So the volume that they had to send was like an entire.
Yeah, it's like 100 kilos normally. Just like half a pallet. Something like that. This arrives in a truck, which is like full of pallets. There's sucralose coming in. It's like this really light powder.
Just cotton candy.
Yeah, but yeah, and that was a company that specialized in the stuff, Oh dear. Okay, just looking through the chat here a little.
Give me 1 second. Yeah,
sure. Well, that's an interesting one. Hate 10 ml jars. Now, the 10 ml jars are relatively recent. I mean, they're in the last, I think, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they introduced the 10 ml jars, because there used to be all of the big 17 ml jars that I think you can still get in certain colors, but that was the standard size. And then the 10 ml came in as kind of a more cost-effective one, because it would sometimes, those big jars would like go goopy if you like used quite a bit, and then the rest would dry up. I think that's why that was brought in. But I also think it was a bit of a price increase, because I don't think they, it's the usual thing, making a smaller amount, reduce the price, but not as much as if you'd actually reduced it.
Again, I think it's 23 mil now.
Was it 23?
The bigger, to me, they may have been 17. And then
no, I think you're right. I think it was the 23. 17 is the Vallejo, aren't they? Yeah, because you had the big 23 ones, and then they went to the 10s.
Yeah.
But yeah, a 148th Lancaster is a big aircraft. I think it's going to eat paint.
You're going to go through a lot of paint, and primer too if you prime it. So yeah.
Yeah, I tried to use aqua color white in my airbrush a few days ago. Absolutely would not spray. Had it thinned down. Yeah. So I actually was going to do a video on paint. It's one I've been thinking about. When I first did this this whole categorization thing, and I put up a video on my channel, I thought I'd like to return and revisit that, but kind of look at different manufacturers and kind of do that analysis of like, well, why do these paints spray differently? Is the particle size different? Are they milled differently? So I actually approached a company that does particle size testing. Typically, the particles go from like sub-micron up to like 12 or 15 microns. If you go into metallic paints, it goes up to like 100 or so. And they came back to me like, yeah, how many samples we want to do, blah, blah, blah. It worked out like they wanted like something like $200 a sample. It was just like, yeah, that video is going to cost me like $100,000.
Right.
I don't think that's cost effective. So until somebody donates me a particle sizing piece of instrumentation,
that's funny,
or a company wants to do that for free for me, that's on hold. But it is one of those things, because so I was doing this with oil washes. I've got some various filters. So when I'm making an oil wash now, panel lining, I'll put it through a 100 micron filter, right? Which is still pretty big in terms of if you think of an airbrush. If you try and put a 100 micron particle through a 0.2 micron airbrush, that's half the size. So if you get 3 particles trying to go through at once, it's going to clog your airbrush. So So knowing the particle size of your paints actually would be quite a useful thing to know, you know. And if you know that, you know, a certain brand has, you know, large particles, is more likely to clog your brush. We find it out kind of organically by just trying these things, right? As a community. But kind of would be useful if they said, you know, just like on average, you know, this is a 10 micron paint particle size. Great, I'll use that in my 0.2, you know. Or if it has like a 50 micron average paint size, it's like, right, I'll use that in my 0.3. I'm not going to risk my 0.2 on that, you know. But yeah, I don't think I would ever put Revell Aquacolor in an airbrush. I think you're a brave man, Phil.
Never again.
Yeah, so I watched that Macabre unboxing as well, John, and it does look like a pretty nice kit. So this is it's a Macabre 2, isn't it? Which
it is the Mark
yeah.
2D. It's a brand new tooling. I built this. It's the only tank I've ever built twice, and that was in the 80s, and it was the Tamiya kit, right? So it would have been, you know, sort of an original one. And even, you know, as a high schooler, it was, I just loved that tank. I built it, and then I built it again, which I never did as a kid, right? And when I saw that Border Models, so I hadn't done a Border Models, and I saw Border Models was coming out with a brand new tooling, and it was a Merkava, and you know, which is kind of a little bit of a time sensitive thing too, you know. And I thought, I got to get one of those. I got to get my hands on one of those, and I'm so glad I did. Yeah,
I've got the Hobby Boss. I think it's the 4, Macabre 4. And I got it from a model show. I think it was £20, like $25.
wow,
It's incredible. I mean, it's not actually that much more if you buy it retail.
okay,
It's an incredible kit in terms of the detail, in terms of what's included. You know, the level that these companies are putting out of kits now, you know, across the board is pretty astonishing. I've been grinding through my second part of the best model company video, and it has got to that stage now where I'm trying to get those last pieces of editing done. You know, when you get onto that curve and you've seen the video so much that you just like, I just want it to be over now. I've done so much. It'll probably tank, you know, when it comes out. But just looking at stuff like I was measuring, been measuring panel lines and thicknesses and injection gates and stuff. And when it comes down to it, looking at between the best and the worst, you're talking about a millimeter difference in things like, you know, injection gate sizes, you know, the pieces that actually hold the pieces onto the frame. You're talking about panel lines and panel line, both sort of thicknesses and depths. So it's that ratio, which is the golden bit. But again, it's fractions of a millimeter now between the best and the worst. And what you class as the worst is still like way beyond, you know, what we had even 20 years ago.
in our youth, yeah.
I think it's incredible just to see. You know, once I'd come through with all of this and I was doing the editing and doing the script, I was just like, you know, I don't want to give the impression that, you know, the people coming bottom here are bad, because it's not that, but it's like, this is the kind of the modeling Olympics. You know, we're competing at such a high standard here that you get a model from any one of these manufacturers and they're probably going to be good. You know, if it's a, you know, if it's not a 1955 Reeboks. Talking about modern kits, obviously,
like an AMT or something.
yeah. AMT wasn't in the final. It didn't make the cut.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, but yeah, it is the standard now is just so high, and that's why it surprises me when you look at things like paint. It's like people are still. It's very much an emotionally driven thing, you know. I get a lot of people coming into the shop and buying Humbrol enamels, you know, and I think I haven't bought an enamel paint in, well, this century, I don't think, you know. And it's like, And the enamels I've inherited, and I'll use them for like washes, not in a native form, not what they're designed for.
I have some enamels from the 90s, man.
Yeah. I have a box of extra color enamels, all of like, particular RLMs and, British colors and stuff that I bought really before acrylics took off. And that was my go-to, set of paints. And then acrylics came out and I'm just like, I haven't opened that box since, really, not that the paints are bad. I mean, they're probably all still fine. I could probably go and open them and might do a video on it one day. Because they're all sealed, they're all pretty tightly sealed when I had them, and they're in another box, so they're probably still okay. But why would you use an enamel which takes 12 hours to dry, that you have to protect from dust during that time? That was always the big headache, right, for enamels. It's like keeping it pristine, because they always got that one little fiber that managed to find its way somehow and rest right in the middle of your wing. They become embedded, and then you take it out, and then you got the impression of it. So yeah, yeah, exactly. We had cats. It was just like, it's impossible. That's why I was out in the garage. Now you'd end up with small insects, flies that would, because it's enamel, of course, they would die because it's softened. So you have the last resting place of this tiny fly. And it's like,
they'd get stuck. Oh no.
Yeah, kind of destroys the scale effect then, then you've got to carve it out. So yeah, I mean, it's not that they were bad paints, it's just that kind of it's stuck of its time. But I still get people who are, who are loyal to that. And there's no reason to, if you're used to that, there's no particular reason to invest in a whole new set of paints or go with acrylics just
That's
for
what you're used to.
Yeah, exactly. But it does amaze me really that there is enough business for those companies to continue supporting that, and I know Humbrol cut down their range a lot with reformulation because of Miko's classification change. But they still have their full range of acrylics, which I think, are they still getting enough traction with those? Because if you speak to anybody, I mean, I don't know, chat, correct me if I'm wrong, but generally when you talk about Humbrol acrylics, people will roll their eyes or, just say, yeah, I would never use them, or they're terrible when I use them, or what they get in the starter kits is rubbish. You don't generally get people, like if you said that about Vallejo, people would say, oh, well, certain colors you can't airbrush very well, but I swear by them. Most people have positive things to say about Vallejo. AK, you get the same sort of things. Maybe some of the earlier generation stuff was a bit hit and miss. The third gen stuff seems to be pretty highly regarded. Yeah, whereas Humbrol ones, it's like, anybody in the chat use Humbrol?
I rarely get it. An example where I used a Humbrol was on that 124th Spitfire, the airfix, and
Right.
it was the beige. What is it? Is it beige green or beige? Yeah, the beige green. And
Yeah.
it is the perfect. So for the excuse me, the spinner and the I don't know what you call that. There's a band.
Oh, the band at the back. Yeah.
On the back, yeah, and this is the perfect color for that. This looks exactly like it, and so this Humbrol enamel beige green, and that was the only Humbrol that I used because I could not find or see any paint that looked just like the color call out. So I got this, and I was really happy I did. And I used Mr. Color, or Mr. Color, not the leveling thinner, but the Mr. Color, which I think you can use with. I think you can use this stuff with enamels. Yeah, I used this to thin it, and it worked fine.
Yeah.
So this is good stuff. Sorry.
So Humbrol's still in my paint lacquer. They separate, but also seem to reconstitute well. I take it does that mean the enamels or the acrylics? Interesting to know that.
Sorry about that.
So I have a couple of Humbrol tins. Paint is still good despite the age. Yeah, you see, enamels, well, especially when enamels settle out, they tend to settle out. Obviously, the denser, like the pigment, settles out. And then you have a layer of solvent. Provided you've got a tight seal on your tin, that solvent isn't going anywhere, so it shouldn't set. It shouldn't cure or dry out. And provided that's okay. I mean, God, I remember mixing paints with my dad when he was, when he was doing the painting. So I was too young to paint. And I remember mixing the paint up. That would be my job. And you would get paint completely separated out and have to mix it up, and it would go lumpy, and then gradually, after 5 minutes of mixing it with the back of a paintbrush, it would become fluid enough to paint. So a lot of people still seem to have some Humbrol. I don't think that's quite the same as using Humbrol. Okay, bought a selection of Humbrol enamel tins back in February.
Testers enamels those are the ones I still have from at least the 90s, and they still work great. I have this Testers enamel chrome. It's probably for paintbrushing. It's probably my favorite chrome. And that paint that I have is now at least 34 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you could be getting too many 34-year-old acrylics out at the time.
It would be it'd be dust.
Yeah, you see Humbrol black satin in diluted to a panel wash. So yeah, exactly. It's like same thing that I do with mine is dilute them as washes. And the reason, of course, that enamels and other solvent-based paints work better as washes is because they don't have the surface tension of water. So any water-based acrylic wash will always have some modifier in it to reduce the surface tension. And you'll see that if you drop it onto something, the way it acts is not like a drop of water. But of course, with solvent-based paints like enamels, you don't have to have that because the solvents themselves already have that low viscosity and drop in. You'll go by capillarity through your panel line, etc.
Is that model, Jim? Is that Model Masters or Mission Models? Because Mission Models, do they do enamels?
Not getting the top open is a that is something that you don't really have to deal with acrylics that much. I mean, you might get that bit where you kind of fighting and then you crack it, especially on like screw top bottles, like either that or these type. But prying, yeah,
right here, man. It's right here in my drawer.
that's funny. I mean, I used to have a screwdriver specifically for, or actually, I used to use the end of one of the other reasons I like a scalpel is because you can use the end of it to pry open the enamel lid. Not relevant anymore, but yeah, that was something that all these things that you kind of are used to and then forget because it no longer happens because those pains just vanish. But I used to spray with enamels all the time. I mean, people talk about lacquers now, and the fumes and stuff. I used to spray enamels with white spirit. It's just like never think anything of it with a mask. But
so Jim, the one I had to open today, and I needed my pliers, was this Model Masters satin black. So you can see here it's very gloopy, right? And so you can't avoid it. It gets in, and you probably can't see it, but how dented it is.
yeah,
And the reason it's so deformed is because I'm constantly having to pull out my pliers to open it.
And you know, John, that isn't something just for the enamels either, because I had a bunch of Model Masters, the testers, Model Masters acrylics, and they were in those little glass bottles with the metal tops, and they were exactly the same. And I reformatted them all to these bottles because you couldn't open them. I mean, literally, I think I actually broke one.
Might help. Okay.
And using like you did pliers to get it open, because the thing was just welded shut. It's unreal.
Yeah, and you don't want to. So it's happened to me where I have used pliers to open a bottle, and it shattered the bottle, and
Yeah.
it goes everywhere. I spent more time cleaning up that mess than I could have bought 10 bottles. Yeah.
Now, this is a very controversial statement, and I have to say, Wayne, if you want to come on, by the way, Wayne, link is in the Discord if you want to jump on. I don't agree. Citadel. Okay, there are a couple of things with Citadel paints, right? One is they have one of the worst bottle designs in the industry and always have. It is designed to dry your paints out so they can sell more paint. It really is. It is awful. They have this terrible thing that's supposed to lock the lid.
Yeah.
And it does. But then it's almost impossible to get it back closed. It's just, I've spilt more Citadel paint, I think, probably than all other paints combined. Which, okay, that's not a property of the paint, but it is a function of the
a toothpaste lid.
Yeah,
Toothpaste dries, and you cannot get the toothpaste cap.
Yeah,
back unless you wash it, right?
Yeah. And then, so Citadel is definitely inferior to Tamiya in almost every way, but for spraying, it doesn't even come close. So Citadel being sprayed compared to Tamiya being sprayed is like comparing gold to mud, really. Citadel has got better, but it's also got worse. They've changed the formulation so many times. Their paint is designed primarily for brush painting because it's designed for mini painting.
Warhammer, yeah.
And it has some interesting things. But I think if you, again, I'll cite Squidmar here and the mini painters, they will take Vallejo over Citadel almost any day. There are certain things that they'll use a lot. So things like Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade and stuff, they tend to be the technical ones, the shades and contrast paints they will use for counter shading through the airbrush. But I think for our hobby, Citadel, this isn't to have a rag on Citadel or Games Workshop in particular, but I think trying to say that they come over Tamiya is a controversial statement. But if you want to come on and have your say, Wayne, you're more than welcome.
Please join us.
Yes, absolutely. You are completely correct. I mentioned this before. It's an awful design. Whoever thought of it, well, I imagine they don't work there anymore. And if they do, they're not in the paint department.
Might have been designed out-house, or outsourced, right? You never know.
Yeah, so they've changed their paint lids a couple of times as well. So they used to have screw tops, and they were bad as well. They used to dry out. They really haven't. I mean, why they don't just go to the same standard that essentially every other paint company in that industry uses, these screw top dropper bottles? I don't know. But I don't know. They're an interesting company, Games Workshop. Mark has AK, Vallejo, and Tamiya acrylics. Oh my goodness, my mother binned the last of my Humbrol enamels 20 plus years ago, which cleared out our garage prior to removal. Oh dear, you could have used them for washes. That's or filters or something. That's terrible. Yep, still usable. Well, I'm glad you're back with us, Mark. And never thought you would build another model, but it's drawn you back. I'm glad to see it. Is that another takeaway, Wayne? That's what we want to know. So just scrolling up a little bit just to make sure I've not missed anything. But in terms of, I think for paints, there are several. I mean, several. There's a lot of factors, right? So the first one is, are you airbrushing or are you brush painting? Now, at some point, you will be brush painting something in your model, right? I won't say there aren't anybody, or there are no cases where you won't just use an airbrush, but I think 99.9% of the time you're going to be using a hairy stick at some point, for detail painting or for whatever, unless you've got a particular challenge. Maybe that's a challenge I should do on the channel. Complete a model only using an airbrush. You're always going to be using a hairy stick as well. But I think the choices of what paint you're going to use, whether you're airbrushing or brush painting, can be quite different depending on what you're trying to do. So I think some paints will work pretty much, I wouldn't say equally well through both, but are usable through both. I find Vallejo I can generally use in my airbrush if I've thinned them properly. Some people have some issues with Vallejo, I know, though. Tamiya, I know you can brush paint them if you treat them in a certain way, because they will skin because they're alcohol based. So you either need to add some thinner to retard that, or just be aware of it, not go over them. But they're perfectly brush paintable if you don't treat them like normal paints. If you treat them like normal paints, you'll get a mess. So then you'll think you can't brush paint them, but they airbrush beautifully. So again, I think a lot of this comes down to knowing your tools, and the paint being one of those tools, because I think we just kind of think of paint as it's just all the same, when in reality, these three things here are probably completely, well, I know they are completely different in formulation. They're different in their thicknesses, in the amount of pigment they have in them, the viscosities, the binders they're using, the other things they use to keep them in solution. So, people talk a lot about water-based acrylics and alcohol-based acrylics. It's actually not true. None of that's true. Acrylics aren't water-soluble at all. You have to use copolymers to go with. Acrylics are all quite hydrophobic, actually. So these are all the solvents that are used with the copolymers to keep them in solution. So it's really everything else. the acrylics, the acrylic binders that go with the pigments, essentially paints are like a cocktail, right? And how you mix that cocktail really makes a big difference in what the end result is. So, a margarita and a brandy Alexander, if you treat them the same, won't act the same. So the brandy Alexander would curdle if you put it with the same things as margarita. If you put the lime in there with the cream, it's not going to work. It's the same thing with like the alcohols in a Tamiya paint with a detergent-based acrylic. There are some thinners and extenders which will work with both. There are some which will work only with the alcohol ones that will work only with the water-based ones. I very recently had a horrible, horrible reaction with Tamiya matte varnish. If you put water in that, it will spray and create horrible effects on your model. And the last thing you want when you're matte coating a model is for horrible white patches to arrive on it, because it will crash out. So you have to use Tamiya thinner with that. Really do. Because I was actually using an alcohol-based, actually pure alcohol with some water. Did not like it at all. So the chemistry in all of these paints is so different. And so that's just talking about acrylics. right? That's not going into lacquers. That's not going into oil paints. Oil paints actually, oil paints are completely different again. So oil paints don't dry. So if you think about this acrylic, if I paint it on, when it's dry, the solvent goes and leaves the binder and the pigment, right? An oil paint doesn't do that. It cures. So it actually chemically changes over time. So it's a completely different process, which is why you can reactivate it and stuff for a time. So yeah, depending on what you're using, generally once a paint like an enamel or a lacquer or an acrylic has dried, you can do whatever you like on top of it without reactivating it. Typically. So if you're putting like an enamel on and then going on with an acrylic, they're not going to interact with each other. If you're putting something like a lacquer onto something else, then you get lacquers are very hot, those solvents are very aggressive, and they will attack almost anything. So you have to think a little bit about some of this to not make some of the mistakes that we've all made.
Oh yeah,
in painting, going forward. I mean, I'm sure you've had some wonderful. I'm sure everybody has some wonderful stories about the models that you've had less than ideal situations with because of paint reactions. You give me a use of my 30-plus-year-old Humboldt enamels. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, she likes ice cubes. She loves ice cubes. There you go.
Oh. Yeah, so if you think about AK weathering sets, all the stuff from MIG ammo, a lot of that is, they're all enamel based. They're just dilute enamel paints. So spoilers, there are no secret sauce in them. They are basically just dilute paints. A lot of these things like MIG ammo acrylic filters, are dilute acrylic paints, transparent pigment acrylic paints. So as long as you're keeping, things like Liquitex inks, Daler Rowney inks work really well. If you dilute them down with an acrylic binder, there's lots of stuff on YouTube about making your own contrast paints and things, which are the same kind of thing. But basically, if you've got some sort of agent in there to reduce the surface tension, so like PVA glue or detergent or a proprietary substance or something like IPA or ethanol, put in those pigments, you can create nice glazes, filters, just diluting those down. So if you've got anything like that, experiment with it. There's paint companies will try and mystify this and sell you these things for 20 times the price, and you can do that and they will work. Of course they'll work. But if you've got some old enamels, try it with those. Dilute them down with odorless thinner or white spirit if you can take the smell, and see what effects you can create. It's the same sort of effects that people like Night Shift use. You can see I did it on the JS2 video that I did, just spotting oil paints on. I did it with Spitfire as well, and diluting with white spirit or odorless thinners. I'll always say odorless thinners because white spirit stinks, right? Especially if you're doing it in the house. Like if you've got a partner, don't use white spirit, use odorless thinners. And you're just diluting it down and spreading it out. There's nothing special there. As long as you don't get big clumps, or particles that are going to spoil that look. As long as it's transparent, you're pretty good to go. What about you, John? What do you use for kind of filters, After Effects, shading, kind of stuff on top of your main paint?
Yeah, so I buy primarily for my washes. I love AK washes, so I have quite a few AK washes. However, I cut them at least 50% with I use VMS, Universal Carrier,
Hmm.
which I find to be a pretty high grade, what we call mineral spirits or white spirits, or and then, but if I'm cleaning up, I just use mineral spirits, right? But if I'm diluting it, I'll use that VMS stuff. And uh, I have a couple of Vallejo washes. They're acrylics, and I do have some oils. So some Winsor and Newton oils.
Yeah.
I don't use them a lot. I know some people do. I've got just the basics like yellows, browns, white, black, blue. But I haven't learned how to really make them really fine and thin.
Hmm.
They're splotchy, and then getting them to sort of dilute out or whatever. This is just something I haven't not mastered, even gotten really good at. So I don't use these too much, but I will dilute these with that VMS, Universal Carrier, these oils. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and then even the Tamiya pen liner, I have the straight bottles. Oh, and the gray too. I got the gray. It works. It's really good. I have found some uses. They sell not just the black and the brown, but the gray as well. Maybe some
Yeah, I
other.
think they do it in a triple set as well, don't they? I think that's what I got mine in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I got them all together. To be honest, I haven't used them as much. I find that the black is really heavy,
Mm-hmm.
so it's really like
I cut it.
it's got a lot of pigment in it, and sometimes you don't want that much pigment or that black. Um, so I actually find I use my own mixes a bit more because what I tend to do is I'll mix a like a lamp black and a like a burnt sienna or burnt umber brown
Mm-hmm.
together, which kind of gives a sort of slightly muted black, like a black brown, which just kind of takes the harshness of the black. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's lamp black and burnt umber. Yeah,
Yeah,
I got you, buddy. Yeah.
yeah. So I just mix those together, and then you can control, you know, how dark do you want the wash. So you can adjust that depending on what the subject is. Um, to be honest, the grey I haven't used much because I haven't really had a subject that I've needed to use it on yet. I haven't had an aircraft or any subject really that's white. You know,
You
yeah,
can't really see it because they put the label all the way around it.
yeah, it's all the safety stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's yeah, it's a great. So if you're doing like a white car and you don't want that really stark um
Yeah,
black panel liner for like the doors and stuff, this works really good.
I've actually got a an old Hasegawa Corsair 2, the A7. I think it might be a D. I think it's an A7D, the 48 scale Hasegawa kit. I've always liked the Corsair 2. I don't know why. It's kind of I had one as a child. I can't remember. Maybe it was the airfix kit. I don't know. But I just remember it having loads and loads of bombs on it.
Yeah, yeah,
Loads of stores. And I just kind of, I think as a kid, I liked that. And it kind of just always stuck with me. The Corsair with its strange sort of, because if you took away that air intake, because it's got this big
that's the
sort of guppy mouth, hasn't it? But if you take that away, it's actually quite a cool looking plane. But it's so distinctive that look.
Yep, that area.
But in that old US, kind of VMC, grey top, white undersides with all the like high vis, US symbology on it and the tail flashes and stuff. I like those. So if I get that done, I'll have a chance to use it because I've
Cool.
not had a white, surface that I really need to panel line. But yeah, I tend to go with a kind of black brown because
Mhm.
it's a little bit less harsh, and it kind of, which means I can use it over more surfaces. So at heart, I'm quite lazy. So if I can use one color on like tanks and aircraft of whatever colors, saves me time, you know.
Sure.
Because I do find the Tamiya brown, the brown panel line is a bit. It's like the black is really super strong, and then the brown is kind of like a bit weaker than I wanted it to be.
Agree.
Yeah. So it's just like I tried mixing them, but I think the black overpowers the brown. So that's why I went on to doing kind of my own. But right, I know the chat has been chugging along.
Oh, they're
So
having a good discussion there. Yeah.
hi, Pennies. Good to see you. Hopefully you're still in, and we didn't just miss you. Oh, no, here's one. Are you guys old enough to remember cutting edge resin? Name doesn't ring a bell. Does that mean I'm young?
For me either.
Hey, we're young.
I'm 56. So,
It's just a number, John. It's just a number.
yeah.
Oh, there's a Quink ink for washes.
Parker pen.
So I did once use Quink ink. No, it doesn't really work. Part of the reason that like calligraphy inks, if you like, don't really work is because they're designed specifically to stain whatever you touch. So they're not designed to be washed off. I mean, most inks aren't, but if you use things like Daler Rowney, I'm thinking of the acrylic inks specifically, and the Liquitex acrylic inks. They're artist inks, right? They're designed to be used with, you know, painting in them through airbrush and stuff. And they spray really well actually through an airbrush. Whereas, yeah, pen inks aren't. Pen inks are designed for opacity, and yeah, to stay where they're put. So they kind of have all the opposite properties that you want. If you can make them work, good for you. I wouldn't advise it necessarily as a first port of call. I used the pigment in a enamel olive drab color, same way as an oil paint would be used for filtering and weathering. Responded well to odorless thinner. Please with results. Yep, sounds good. Yep. So again, if you think all a paint is when you reduce it down to, you know, its absolute basics, is some sort of pigment ground to a certain level, say typically around, you know, just submicron up to maybe 12 microns, something like that. And then, so you've got little particles, and they are in some sort of binder. And acrylics, that's an acrylic binder.
Yeah.
And then some sort of solvent. So something that suspends all of that, makes it move around. And then when you lay it down, all of that solvent evaporates away, whether that's water or lacquer or alcohol, whatever, and it leaves the binder trapping the pigment on your surface. So provided you can keep those things in balance, if you could just add, because what can happen is if you add more of the solvent, and if you're not adding it in the same proportions, sometimes your pigment can crash out from the binder, and that's when you get horrible clogs of stuff everywhere. And in an airbrush, that's when it blocks, right? Mm-hmm. But if you can keep that in balance, so like if you're using, and this is why Tamiya have their own proprietary thinners, right? It's because they keep that balance of alcohols, right? They use a lot of butanol in their thinners. It's only about 30% water, the acrylics and the thinner from Tamiya, so it's very alcohol heavy. So they don't like a lot of water, and that's when you have problems. If you put too much water in, if you have to, even like 50-50, they don't like it and they start misbehaving. But if you can dilute them down with that same proportion, like using those proprietary thinners and stuff, then you're just thinning out that binder and the pigment, right? So an enamel paint will thin out, and provided you've got grain size, you know, that pigment distribution grind small enough, we can't distinguish it with our eyes, right? We can't see down to that kind of level. Of course, if you can see it, then your pigment's not very finely ground. And that's when you get little speckly bits, right? But enamel paint should be pretty good for that, as you have rightly demonstrated, Jim. So terpenoids, The main disadvantage of terps as turpentine substitute is typically they stink, right? It's a really
To high hell. Yeah.
pungent solvent. Now, the artists' alternatives tend to be more refined because it tends to be those terpenoids in the terps, which are the actual smelly stuff. It depends on the source as well, because you can get pine-based ones now, which like smell quite of pine, a bit nicer, and citrus-based ones. I've not tried any of those, but it's something I'm thinking of because sometimes when you use white spirit, and this is one of the things with white spirit with oils, and why oils don't take months to dry on a model, right? Is because the white spirit you use, the artist's odorless thinners, whatever, they just basically destroy the main structure of that oil paint. So it's no longer held in that kind of, it's quite a viscous, blobby stuff. So when you're adding so much solvent, you're actually breaking all of that up and destroying it. So that's why they don't take hours and hours and hours to dry, because they cure very quickly once they're broken down on that level. But yeah, the advantage of terpenoids is they dissolve this stuff really well. Disadvantage is they tend to smell. So it depends. If you've got no sense of smell or you've got somewhere really well ventilated, you're good. Part 2 of the best model company case. Okay, fingers crossed, provisos and everything right. It should be Saturday. I'm trying to take it at a balanced level because at the moment I'm kind of saturated with it. So I can only stand doing so much of it at once each day. But I would say 80% of the editing's done, maybe even 90%. So Saturday allows me a good amount of time for any problems or anything, and to be able to hit that. So it's a long video. It's the longest video I've done for a while. It's like 42 minutes or something. So I've been trying to just chop bits out, kind of some of the verbiage, just to make it manageable. Yes, indeed. Lidl do, and Aldi do put out oils. So a lot of people will say don't use cheap oils for this sort of stuff, for modeling things. I do use those exact oils. The thing is, if they're good enough for oil painting, they're probably good enough for us. I've used them, and they certainly work absolutely fine without any grittiness, enough to do panel lines and other washes on. So certainly if you're starting out and don't want to invest a lot of money, because oil paints, artists' oil paints especially, could be very expensive, a cheap set from Amazon or from Aldi or from Hobby Lobby in the US or wherever is absolutely fine to start with, right? I mean, is it going to be competition standard? I mean, maybe, but that's not where you're going to be starting anyway. So absolutely feel free to learn on those techniques. And if you feel that you need to get a specific color in that kind of super grade at a later stage, then you can do it, right? But absolutely, there's no reason that you should have to start off with, Arbitone oils, for instance. I just bought a panel lining tool. Interesting. Looks like a fountain pen nib. Yeah.
Let us know which one you got, Gary.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know if it works. I have a great theory on, or kind of working theory on most of these. You see some wonder tool at a model show, and unless everybody's using it, it's probably not a wonder tool, right? It's probably a great sales idea. Sometimes these things take off, and they are what they appear to be, but a lot of the times it's just a brush will do. So it'd be interesting to know if that actually does work well.
I haven't been able to do it, man. I've got myself 2 different tools. I got one of these Krios panel liners, which is this one is a 0.3 mil, and this will tear the hell out of anything you you put it on.
Oh, okay. I may have been.
It's got a hook. It's got this.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's then a scriber, right?
It's like a scriber. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what he's talking about, or?
I think no. I think he's talking about actually one that does the panel lining, like with oil.
Oh, like a pen. Oh, okay, gotcha. Because I got one of these other scribers, and
how does that one work?
Thing I just have not mastered is, yeah, scribing. Terrible.
I've got a couple of tools, one of which I used a lot, and I broke it. I've never been able to find the same thing. It's like a little wooden tool with this little kind of hook in the end, and it's just the right amount of sharp without digging into the plastic. It would just remove a little bit. And the other one is another tool that I got, which I don't know where it came from. I think it's a dentist tool, which works really well. So I don't think either were necessarily dedicated or designed for that purpose, but they both work really well. The other thing I've tried recently is what David Demek does, Plasmo, is use a razor saw. I've tried using a razor saw for panel lining, and yeah, it works all right, actually. Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, indeed. Corsair 2, SLUF, short little ugly fella. Italeri acrylic washes. Not actually seen any of those. Now, are those the Vallejo washes? Because I know Italeri tend to use Vallejo for their stuff. So yeah. I think they're probably the Vallejo acrylic washes, which I have used. Interestingly, not in scale modeling, mainly in the mini painting arena. And actually, I didn't like them as much as the Citadel washes. But then actually, when I got into making my own washes, I was kind of like, well, actually, I prefer mine. So, if you want, by the way, if you want to make a really good general panel lining wash with acrylics, Payne's Grey is the one to go for. Payne's Grey is a fantastic. It's an artist color. It's like a dark blue gray kind of color, which means it goes with a lot of different things. It's been used in the art field for years on different things.
Payne or
Payne's Grey, yeah. So it is Payne's Grey. That's the
there you
one.
Go. Cool.
So that's like burnt umber or lamp black or whatever. So it's been used by artists for a long time. That works really well for a whole host of different stuff. And in terms of making your own washes, that's out of acrylics. That's a whole other subject. Basically, you can get transparent acrylic medium from like artists' place as well. You can either get matte or semi-matte gloss. So you just need some of that, water, and your pigment, and you've got a wash. So all the artist medium, the acrylic medium does is break that surface tension and make it flow into your recesses. And then again, you just dilute it until the point at which you want to, have the density that you want. Okay.
Laser create.
I like that.
Yeah. I wish I was. I should be when I was 13.
I should be wearing. I got a T-shirt which actually has like a car speedometer on it, which has like in the mileage bit, it has the year I was born, and then it has the mileage needle at my age. But it's like in European cars, you probably don't get this in the US. It's miles per hour and then kilometers per hour, right? But so this one is like actual age and how old I feel. So it's like 20 years difference.
That's a good one.
Okay. Yeah, you'll find that quite often airbrushes will come with a bottle of ink, acrylic ink or acrylic colors, liquid colors to practice with. And it's a good thing to do, right? To get the feel of your airbrush, to use something that was supplied with it. You should be fairly sure that you're not going to clog it up with that, right? Okay. Controversial. Build the airplane, no masks, spray it, then gently scrape the transparencies with a whittled bit of preferably springy airfix sprue. Well, that's one way of doing it. I'm guessing you're talking about spraying it with acrylics, because anything else, you're not going to be scraping it off afterwards.
Because it'll mar the surface of that clear plastic.
Yeah, lacquers would destroy it. Enamel, well, yeah, white spirit's going to craze it. And I mean, that's bold, I would say, rather than controversial. Good luck to you if you try it. You're a braver man than me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'll say.
Me too.
There is something to be saying like that as well. Keeping your model space private, but that's kind of chemical warfare. That's I just find keeping it messy works well enough, you know. That's generally my strategy, my excuse anyway. Not a problem at all, Wayne. Open invite as it is each week. Yes, indeed. Coating the build prior to washing with pledge floor finish. So this is the great shame about the demise. You know, we need a petition for Johnson & Johnson to start making it again, because Pledge, aka Future, aka Crystal Clear, is a fantastic product, or was a fantastic product. There are still bottles of it kicking around in stores in various places. If you can find one, it has to be pledged with Future finish. Otherwise, it's not the same stuff. I'm still on my search for a replacement, and I still have to do my last test, which I keep meaning to do, and unfortunately keep getting things come up in the way. I think I might just have found something. Not quite the same. In some ways it has better properties. And so I don't want to say anything before doing these other tests, because if I say, oh, I found this wonderful thing, it's even better than Pledge, and then it screws up a load of stuff, I don't want to be responsible for anybody like marring a model. That would just be awful.
Still a hypothesis.
It's still a hypothesis which needs the final testing, yeah. Because what I found is, I had some spare pieces from the airfix, the 124 scale Spitfire. So I used the rear tail planes, because it has spare ones for the different type. So it's got quite a lot of rivets in there. So I thought, well, I'll use that because I can then tell how a wash will go over it, like an oil wash. And what I found is, when I put the oil wash over this finish, because I tried several like acrylic floor products that leave basically an acrylic layer on, which is how Future works effectively. And I tried them, and like the wash just like, you know, comes off, like it either fills in the rivets and stuff, doesn't work. This stuff, what I found is you put the oil wash over and it kind of all stays on there. And I thought, oh my God, I've ruined it. It's just like completely gone. But then you can actually be quite aggressive, because it kind of almost sticks to it. You can actually like use a little bit of white spirit on a piece of tissue and wipe it off. And you kind of have to actively wipe it, so it really remains in those panel lines. So in one way, it actually works better, because you're not pulling it out, you know, by just wiping it. So, but I just need to make sure it doesn't stain it completely. But you see, if it does work, it'd be great because it's available everywhere and it's pretty cheap. But it's not a floor polish. It's quite interesting. If it works, it'll be quite hilarious. But I'll ask for commission from them as well.
$40. Oh my gosh. It's like trying to find Model Master paint now. It's really expensive. So yeah.
Yeah. I was glad I picked up all the acrylics I did.
Put this away.
Just trying to read through the comments. The greatest caulking tool in the world is the human finger. Well, is it though? I don't know. So this is obviously not for modeling, but I had these little silicon wedges. So they have a different profile depending on what sort of caulking you want to wipe, and that thing's fantastic. The problem I always found because I always used to use my finger to just wipe away the excess,
Sure.
but it does stick to cork sticks to everything, right, including your finger. It's designed that way, obviously, because otherwise it'd be useless. And it's really hard to wash off, and it's a real pain that way. Whereas it doesn't stick to silicon. Silicon's a miracle thing. So it's also a lot smoother than my finger. Good evening, sir. Once again, Dave, if you ever want to pop in, you're more than welcome.
How you doing, Dave?
Bit late now.
Always good to see you, buddy.
That is a terrible, terrible pun, and you're instantly banned, Wayne. The invite is retracted for that pun. God. Dave, yes, it is possible to order the senior GB decals at my shop. Now, I am only posting to the UK. I have had a couple of inquiries from people in Europe. So I've said that I would look into it. I think it's about £1 more to ship them to, I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been the Netherlands. But that's untracked. So if you want tracked, it's like an extra £5. It's really expensive then. So depends what you want. But it is absolutely possible to order them, and a number of people have done. John has been kind enough to arrange the shipment over from STS Decals. Guys, STS Decals have been really good as well. Brian as well, I should mention, from Got Fuel. He's kind of orchestrated and coordinated a lot of the communication. So yeah, we're getting an initial order in, which should be able to cover everybody's initial orders. If we get a lot more in the future, then I'll put an order through STS, probably with some other stuff. I'm already thinking about some other things because they don't have a UK distributor. So yeah, watch this space. We'll see. Yes, guard it with your life, Graham. $40. Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I did think I could sell it in these little bottles in the shop for £5 a time. That'll be my money. That's my retirement. Decanting a litre bottle into 10ml bottles. It's not me. No. That is correct. That is correct. So if you are ordering in the UK, you can order directly from the website. Say for Europe, it may be actually easier and cheaper to order directly from STS Decals in the US. So I said I had an inquiry already. I think it was from the Netherlands. And so I think they're investigating how much it would be to ship to there directly. And obviously, if it's more cost effective for me to handle it, I'm happy to. But yeah. Gary, of course you can ask a non-paint question. Absolutely. We were talking about airfix SciFi at the beginning, so please go ahead.
Yeah. If I could just say something, Alex is not taking any profit whatsoever from the sale of these decals. He's basically buying them at, you know, at cost and distributing them at cost. And I'm going to get them to you, Alex, tracked, you know, no extra cost. So there's nothing to pass on to anybody or whatever. And
yeah, John's being a star.
so,
I have
so are you. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, so are you, because Alex isn't, you know, this isn't a retail thing. He's just like,
yeah. So the retail thing that may come from it is obviously, I didn't know really STS decals before this. I do now. They don't have a distributor in the UK, and looking at their stuff, they do a whole bunch of card decal stuff that I know. I think people will be interested in over here. I know I've got a couple of guys that come into the shop quite regularly who are into cars. It'd be quite cool to stock some of their stuff. And also they do custom things. So, you know, if I was ordering a quantity, I could get some custom ones done as well. So for me, you know, one, to support the community, you know, and the group build, and that is the main motivator. But, you know, if from it, I've got a couple of new friends out of it, you know, like Brian and some of the US community, and, you know, make some good contacts, you know, that's my payoff for it. But you know, I'm going to be doing a group build vehicle that John again is kindly sending over, because I managed to actually find an American car that looks nice. So
it's coming with the stickers. It'll be tracked.
Okay, is it okay to go your own way with the model, or you should stick? Oh no, Gary. Oh, you've asked the wrong person. So I almost never follow the instructions in a kit. So the instructions to me are a kind of a guideline. They'll show you the pitfalls that may be ahead in a model, but they're absolutely 100% not to be taken as gospel truth. For one thing, sometimes manufacturers will get it wrong and actually make mistakes in their own instructions. Sometimes they'll correct those, sometimes they don't. Other time, I mean, if you look at any of my builds, I think the Spitfire 24 scale one is probably the most obvious example. You'll see I'll follow the general path of the instructions, and then you'll see I'll say, well, I've skipped ahead here to step 16 or something because I'm doing this part separately because I want to paint it all up as a sub-assembly, and then I'll come back to here. If you're doing a tank and you want to leave some bits off, it's your model. So I think the golden rule in modeling is it is your model. Once you buy that kit, it is yours, and it is yours alone to do with as you see fit. If you want to glue it backwards and paint it sky blue pink with yellow dots on, that's your model. If that's the pleasure you're going to get from it, and in fact, the pleasure of seeing other people say, "Oh, that was never like that," would be something, bit of Schadenfreude by itself. But absolutely, don't let anybody gatekeep your hobby. So, you know, if it's frowned upon by people, they're not the kind of people that you really need in your life anyway. So absolutely, you know, leave those bits off. We all do it. You know, add bits on if you want to. Do it however you want. The same, it's your model.
It's your canvas. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it is 10 o'clock, but we do have a last question. I'll let you take that, John. Do you have an opinion on ammo panel line washes?
Well, I like the so ammo is MIG.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't have any ammo MIG. I don't think I have any ammo MIG stuff at all, and it's not because I'm adverse to it. I just haven't. So the Merkava. So I'm going tangential here because you were asking about the panel line washes, but the MIG ammo, it triggered the thought that, with that Merkava, all the color callouts are in MIG.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and or a MIG, ammo MIG. I don't have any of those, and but I do have lots of the AK, and it's not about brand loyalty or anything. It's just because I've used them, but I have not. So sorry, Mark.
No, I don't have any. I've heard good things about the MIG ammo stuff.
Sure.
I recently got into the shop a bunch of the acrylic filters, but I don't have the panel line stuff, and it's principally because I do have the AK ones, so I kind of be double stocking, which is fine, but you tend to have one set of things because otherwise it's all extra stock. People probably aren't going to buy both, so they'll buy one or the other. To be honest, I again, like John, I don't have practical experience. I would say generally, if stuff's out in the marketplace, the MIG and the AK stuff is pretty good. I think you would hear from people if it wasn't. Most modelers are pretty vocal when things don't match their expectations. So I think the MIG stuff is pretty good, but I couldn't say definitively. As for this one, I would say whatever matte black you find easiest to use. Personally, I wouldn't use the Revell Aquacolor, but to be honest, when I did the Spitfire, I think I just sprayed it with rattle can, with Autotech. I didn't even use a model paint. So I would say whatever you feel most comfortable with and gives the best finish. And yeah, Mr. Color satin black. That's good. Sky blue pink. Not heard that phrase in years. Yes, it was a favorite of my mother's. Well, still is. But okay. Okie dokie. Well, I think we're going to call it there, guys. Thank you so much, John, for joining me once again.
Thanks for having
me. Thank you guys for giving us the topic for tonight, or topics, I should say. The FX one was fairly brief. Paints is a little bit broader. But thank you for joining myself and John. Hopefully next time, maybe David and maybe Wayne will come on. We'll get a few more people on as we become a little bit more established. Again, Wednesday's an odd one, which is why I kind of picked it.
It's perfect.
And it's midweek, goes with them. But yeah, feel free to join us next week, and I'll put up another community post to see what subjects you think we should be discussing next time, unless something more interesting and pressing from the great world of modeling news comes along to block us out for us next time. So thank you. Have a great evening, everyone, and great week. See you next time. Cheers, guys.